Thanks for tuning in for this episode of the Real ResQ podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. I want to say thanks to our sponsors for this episode, and that's Breeze Eastern, the world's only dedicated helicopter hoist and winch provider. They are dedicated to the mission when nothing is impossible. Check them out today at breeze-eastern.com. And Axness. Their mission, wireless intercommunication. Because when lives are at stake and conditions are challenging, clear communication is of the utmost importance. Check them out today at axness.com. And don't forget to check out the realrescuestore.com to get all your podcast gear. Now, coming up next in this episode, we are joined by another pilot and some of his amazing stories from his time in the United States Coast Guard. So please welcome our next guest, Mr. Tombo Jones. My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard rescue swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real ResQ podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real ResQ podcast. Today, I've got another United States Coast Guard pilot who is currently working at Virginia Tech, Mr. Tombo Jones. What's up, Tombo?
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me today. I'm very excited to be on.
Me too. I'm really excited to have you on. It's been over a year that we've been working on this, just for the record.
I didn't realize it had been quite that long, but yeah, I'm thrilled to be on. I'm a fan of your podcast. Certainly love scrolling through and finding folks I know, and then listening to some of the podcasts for folks I don't even know. And so, I'm a little humbled to be on here because I don't think I've done anything special, but I really appreciate the invite, and I'm excited to be here. So,
well, I'm excited to have you, and I tell everybody, I don't care what you had. It doesn't have to be bigger and better than everybody else. I just want to hear the stories. That's why I like it, and I think that's why everybody else keeps listening, because they're like, we don't want to hear Jason Quinn. We just want to hear whoever the guest is. So today it's you.
You bring a lot of fun to it, that's for sure, and some epic star cases you've covered. So it's fun to listen to.
Right on. Well, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Well, let's get into you a little bit. So if you don't mind, Tombo, give us a little background, like who you are, where you're from, how you got into the military, because I know you went Army first, and
That's
then
right.
transitioned to the Coast Guard. So let bring us all the way right up until the Coast Guard.
Okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Griffin, Georgia. That's a town that's south of Atlanta. And grew up there, and kind of from the get-go, I had some great mentors in my hometown who had both been in the Army during Vietnam. And these were gentlemen that kind of inspired me to go in the Army. And so from the get-go, even as a teenager, I kind of had a really good idea that that's what I wanted to do in my life. And I went to after graduating high school, I went to basic training because to enlist in the Georgia Army National Guard, because the college that I was going to go to called North Georgia, at the time called North Georgia College. It's now University of North Georgia. But it had a Corps of Cadets, and it had a scholarship program that would, if you enlisted in the Georgia Army National Guard and went to school here to learn to be an officer at the same time, they would pay your way. So I was happy to do that. Glad to go ahead and get myself enlisted. Very excited about that, because it was an opportunity to start actually doing, real stuff while learning to be prepared to be an officer. And so enlisted infantry and paratrooper. So from the get-go, I went to airborne school and was jumping out of airplanes, which was another emotional event to learn to do. And it was
That's
super
what I'm
fun.
talking about.
Yeah. And so for 4 years, I was in a guard unit with some really top-notch folks who had come from special forces or Ranger battalions, and had come to this unit to be in the Guard. And so had some great mentors there about how to be a good soldier, essentially. And that was actually really vital in me, I think, becoming kind of guiding me when I became an officer, to always try to remember what it's like to be enlisted. And one of the funny stories is that kind of led me to become an aviator was one night we're doing a training mission during the summer, like you do for guard drill at Fort Bragg, which is now called Fort Liberty. But and we're about to be on a 5-day training mission where no one's allowed to talk. So it's a small team. It's a LRS team, which is a long range surveillance unit. And we're training. And so I'm gonna be with these 5 people on my team, and we're gonna use hand and arm signals for the next 5 days, or whisper at least, and only talk about the mission. And super loud. These helicopters insert us in that night, and the helicopters leave, and all of a sudden it's super quiet, and we're about to go into noise and light discipline. And my team leader says, referring to the pilots and the aviation crews, he says those SOBs are going home to sleep with their wives tonight. And that's the last thing I heard anybody like say out loud for 5 days. And so this is like ringing in my head the whole time I'm sitting out here in the woods drinking swamp water that I'm trying to sterilize with iodine tablets and typing messages back about what's going on at this particular recon site we're doing. But anyway, this is like just in my psyche. And so I start thinking, man, maybe I need to become a pilot. That sounds pretty great. And so that's kind of the inspiration that started. And so when I graduated from North Georgia, I asked to go aviation. Went Army Aviation, graduated from flight school, and got stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. So that was my first duty station. Had some great mentors about aviation there. I'll talk about some guidance one of them gave me that really applied to a SAR case later. And then after being at Fort Hood, while at Fort Hood, got to do almost a year in Bosnia. That was a great experience because I got to fly every day.
Oh, wow, nice.
Yep. And then while at Fort Campbell, was a company commander there, and had actually things were. I was starting to get to the end of my company command, which is, to give you an idea, you're responsible for 48 folks and 8 helicopters, and a mix of pilots and mechanics essentially, and crew chiefs that fly on the aircraft, because I flew Blackhawks. And towards the end of that tour, the guy that I relieved for command was leaving to go to the Coast Guard in this direct commission aviation program, which is the first time I'd heard about it. His name was Chris Bonner. And I was like, and this is the second time I'd heard about a pilot doing this. Another great mentor I had while I was at Hood was Derek Thorsrud. He also left the Army, went to the Coast Guard, and I was like, what is this program? And so started asking questions about it, decided to put in my packet for it. And then we found out we were going to Iraq. And so I pulled my packet back because I wanted to make sure, this is what you train for in the Army, right? Like your entire life to be in an opportunity like that. And so this was during the invasion. So I got to take my company to Kuwait and then into Iraq. And then once that was over and they took me out of command and I was no longer with my company, I put my packet back in and ended up getting picked up on the particular board with, I was with some great people. Corey Braddock was on the board that I was on, got picked up. Jamie Reed. Anyway, quite a few folks that I really look up to this day. So I was really excited to get picked up on that board. And my first duty station was Savannah. So I was and the way it works in the DCA program, you may have heard, I had been in 03 for 5 years, I think. And the Coast Guard, you have to revert to 02, no matter what grade you were, is the way the way I understand it. So I'm starting over as an 02 new guy. I had aviation experience, but I didn't have any Coast Guard experience at all. So it was good in the fact that it was an opportunity for me to learn coming into Savannah, but it was not. It was also, a little bit of a. I was never bitter about it. I was happy to do it, but to start over and get knocked down quite a few in grade was a good opportunity. There's no really high expectations. You're just there to learn, and it was honestly it was a little bit relaxing in that aspect, but I had a lot to learn. So yeah,
that's a good way to put it. You get knocked down, you're like, oh yeah, no, totally good. I'm really good with it. I can totally hear it in your voice too.
Well, it was crazy. I had gone from being responsible for all these people and all this equipment, and now I'm the Savannah morale officer. Like I'm doing parties. Like I'm like, it was actually kind of cool. I'm like, this is a great break. But anyway,
I think that's right up my alley. Oh my gosh! Yeah. Could you imagine you and me together doing morale stuff? Oh, good Lord!
Oh, we planned some great parties. Yeah, it was a good time.
It would be epic.
You have somebody whose responsibility it is to ensure everybody's having fun. That's a new concept for me. But yeah, so
that's fantastic.
So got to Savannah. It was wonderful place to start my tour. And we actually ended up there. You know, you had shared with me about how you ended up at your first duty station, Kodiak, because of you know, your spouse being in the Coast Guard. My wife had gone to work at Armstrong University in Savannah, and so we had actually moved there when we came out of the Army because the board that I'd put in for the Coast Guard didn't convene. It got canceled in October, didn't convene until December, so we had to move somewhere. We followed her career, and I was shocked that the Coast Guard was like, the detailer was like, "You're already living in Savannah? Won't cost to move you? Yeah, you can start there." I was like, you know, I thought I was going to have to try to convince him, and surely we were going to get moved. And so that was another great experience that that the detailer was working with us to essentially start my career at a place we were already living. So
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Way to go, detailer. That does not always happen. So the fact that you got that is, you know, it's part of that life work balance. But if you can get it and everybody's happy, and you're like, oh, this is money, because you've obviously, like, we have all seen it go the other way. Hey, as a matter of fact, some of us have even had it happen the other way. We're like, oh, that's not what I want. Damn it.
yeah,
But you know what? Whatever. It is what it is.
And I didn't, you know, being new to the Coast Guard, I didn't know anybody's name hardly, except for the two folks that I told you that had come from the Army. And this detailer's name was Todd Trimper, and I'll never forget because I felt like I was indebted to him. Like, he did me a huge favor, you know, and he probably didn't think twice about it, but it made a huge difference in my family's life, right? So
yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, I sometimes I don't think it's that hard to make somebody else happy. But I'm not sitting in their shoes. I'm not looking at everybody that wants to go to Unit A and doesn't want to go to Unit B, and you need to cut that list in half and send them to both. Like, I'm not that guy. Like, I'm not there. So, but I mean, if you've got whatever, I'm not even going to get into it. I'm not there. I'm not that guy. So I'm not going to speculate or judge.
You know, you have tons of people that want to go to Savannah or Kodiak, and, you know, folks don't want to go to Atlantic City as a prime example. And those are probably really dated, you know, generalizations. But when I was in, that tended to be the trend, and the detailer has to send folks to these places, right? So
yeah, yes, agreed. I mean, bottom line is you work for the United States government. We will send you where we tell you.
Every once in a while, we need a reminder of that. Right?
Yeah. Quick question. So you were flying H-60s in the Army, and you made it to Iraq. Anything stand out in Iraq? Like, out of like my own diving into that world that you could talk about legally?
Oh yeah. It's it was a really great experience. I'll say that my unit was responsible for supporting the Apaches battalions. So I was in, it's called an attack brigade. So even though I flew 60s, we were hauling soldiers for deep reconnaissance. We were carrying Apache parts and equipment, and also following some of the deep attacks. We were responsible for helping get downed Apaches out of Iraq. To be honest, it was you know, probably it was a fairly, but even though it was during the invasion, there were a lot of, you know, terrible weather conditions with the squalls. I forget what they call it, but when big winds pick up and you can't fly for 3 days, or if you get caught in these sandstorms, and it's called a squall or something like that. Anyway.
No, it's called a oh my gosh, I freaking live here and I know it. This is terrible. We just had one the other day. Shamal. Shamal.
There it is. Yep. Shamal. Yeah. So crazy thing was, we did the first day we crossed the phase line for the attack into Iraq. We only flew for a day and a half, and then all of a sudden we couldn't fly for 3 days because one of those blew through. So the whole war stopped while this was going on. I mean, generally speaking, aviation wise anyway. So, but anyway, we picked it back up. It was, and my unit ended up helping support the attacks through Karbala Gap and into Baghdad, and then eventually we ended up in northern Iraq in a place called QR West, and outside of Mosul, and did operations there. I think the biggest takeaway that I would suggest is this is great. I had a battalion commander. His name was Chuck Fields, and he was so good about looking out for his people. And here's a prime example. We had they're called ALQ 144s, and they look like the disco balls on the Army Blackhawks right up above the engine cowlings, right behind the main rotor head. I don't know if you ever noticed them, but essentially they are a device that is designed to send out IR light to confuse heat-seeking missiles, right? So like,
Ooh, cool.
and the sand was destroying them, like because they create heat inside, and the sand was causing them to like crystallize or something, and they quit working. And so we were essentially very much sitting ducks. Like we had no defense against. We did have some flares, but they weren't nearly as effective. And so he essentially allowed us to stand down and turn down missions that ended up going to other units, right, to fly. But he had a ton of pressure on him for us to fly, and he was like, "No, I'm putting my soldiers in harm's way because this equipment doesn't work. We don't have the logistical training to get proper, the replacement equipment." And so I just think, what a great example to him to not take pressure from the higher command to get things done, and instead act as essentially our protector, which was a great example for me. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool. It's great to see leaders do that, and
yeah,
again, we've probably all seen something on the other side of it where they don't totally back it up, and you see both. It's part of life. But that's great that he was willing to do that, because he's getting a lot of heat from up top. You're like, listen, I'm not asking, I'm telling. Like you're like, well, let me lead up and let me tell you why I cannot. I respect your decision, sir.
It was a great example for me of why it's important to continually look out for your folks, and even if it's at the detriment of your career, sometimes it's worth it to step up, because we would have done anything for him after that point, right? Like we knew he had our back. So
yeah, well, that's super cool. I like that. Right on. All right, so another question. Now you're coming out of the Army, flying an H-60, which is a badass aircraft. I absolutely love the Blackhawk, and you get dropped into an H-65 Dolphin, which is not quite as powerful as the H-60. How about, is that, can I say that? Is that legal?
Oh, that's what I would have said. Maybe in not such a nice way. Like, it was comical because I got to Savannah and everybody was like, you were a 60 guy. They're like, you're going to over torque this thing. Like, you cannot pull power when you need it. Like, and I'm like, what? Like, how do you, if I can't do that, like, what are we going to hit the water? And they're like, well, sometimes it's a little tight, And so I had to get used to, you're right. In that 60, man, you could pull all you wanted. It had that droop compensator in it, tons of power, especially with the GE engines. And, you just pull what you wanted. And I became spoiled at what Sikorsky had built a phenomenal aircraft there. And then got to the Eurocopter 65, which had some really pluses for flying in bad weather in terms of autopilot systems, but power was not one of its
right.
Pluses. It's the other thing that was weird too, Jason, was the rotor turns the opposite way, right? So you have to push the opposite pedal to keep the note. So when you pull power, you in the Blackhawk, you push left pedal. So your brain, I don't remember how many hours I had, maybe 1,500 when I came to the Coast Guard. My brain had just gotten used to when I pull power, push left pedal, right? Like, and that was that would make things get very exciting really quick in the 65 because you're supposed to push the opposite pedal. So it took a little bit to get used to that. But yeah, and the power was a major concern, and not enough fuel. Like, always running out of fuel, and
you're out of gas on takeoff. It's amazing.
Yeah, having to do weight and balance like a pilot should. Like in the 60, one time in Iraq, we picked up the 60, if I remember right, was designed to carry 12 soldiers in the back with the seats. And we could get more soldiers in if we took the seats out. So we had Kevlar blankets on the floor and just took the seats out. Kevlar blankets were designed to protect them. And I'll never forget, we went to pick up this platoon one time and we didn't have enough room. I remember my crew chief, Sergeant Ray, he was like, sir, there's two more squads here waiting and they're going to be left. It wasn't another helicopter behind us. We're going to have to come back or send somebody. And I'm like, can we get them in? And he's like, let's try. And so he's packing people in. And I'm telling you, Jason, there were soldiers sitting on top of each other with their rucks on top of each other and their weapons. And they were happy to do it because they didn't want to be left. I think this is in Anajaf. I'm trying to remember exactly which city. But anyway, I'll never forget, like, we had 29 people in this helicopter, including our crew. So we had 25 soldiers in the back of this Blackhawk. And And normally, in a 65, you could get a few, what do you get, 5 people in the back, and it's super crowded. You got weight and balance problems.
Right.
Not in the 60, man. Like, we had these soldiers, and here's the other funny thing. You know how the 60 is designed? We get ready to take off, and my compass is like turning, my gyro compass, and there's a slave down on the center console, and I look, and there's some soldier sitting on my center console, like, and I'm like, hey, you can't sit there, like, you're gonna have to stand up or something, Anyway, that's how packed we were that day, but the 60 power was no problem, man. Even with 29 people on board, full power, took off out of there, no issue at all. Yeah, that thing's amazing.
Oh, God, I love that aircraft so much.
Yeah.
All right, so you get into the 65. I'm going to tweak it a little bit. You're going through your qualification. You're learning the aircraft, and now you're released to stand duty and go out and do stuff. Do you remember your very first call out?
Yeah, I do. It was, you hope that your first SAR case is just fairly benign and a learning experience. Mine was not benign, but it was definitely a learning experience. It was not at all what I thought it would be. So, I'm stationed in Savannah, and we have the airfac in Charleston, and so you pull a 24-hour duty shift. There's always a crew and an aircraft in Charleston, and a crew and an aircraft in Savannah. And we happened to be at the airfac in Charleston that day. And what's crazy is we used to play a lot of Halo up there. And I remember we're playing Halo, and we get the SAR phone rings, and so we have to stop gaming. And there's a couple of kayakers that are coincidentally enough, they're off Savannah, and it's heavy fog. They're lost was what they reported, and they're in some kind of like swamp. They're in swamp grass, and they can't figure their way out. And so they're asking, the rescue center has got what they think is a decent lat long on them, and they want us to go rescue these kids, which are afloat in a kayak, but stuck. They don't know where they are. The heavy fog, they're in this marsh. And I said, coincidentally, near Savannah, the Savannah crew, I think the aircraft had broken. I don't remember the reason, but they didn't launch on it. Instead, they decided to launch the airfac on it. So we go to launch, and I'm new at this. I just gotten qualified, practice hoisting, but I'm in the left seat. The Rich Bates was the pilot I was with in the right seat, and he had a fair amount of experience. And coincidentally, he had come from the Army too. And so, but the weather was terrible. Like, I remember it was IFR conditions, and I'm thinking, we're going to launch out, file IFR, and go, somehow get down to Savannah. I'm trying to figure out and work with him on it. And he says, no, what we're going to do, the airfac was real close to the water. And so he says, we're going to launch out. We're going to get feet wet. We're going to get up with ATC, but we're going to fly due regard down low, utilizing our radar. We know that when we're over the water, we know where the obstacles are. As long as we're feet wet, we can fly at 1,000 feet and stay low and cruise down there. That way we don't have to find an instrument approach to shoot, to get down to the water when we get to Savannah. And so we're mapping the shoreline. We get feet wet. I'm flying. We've got our radar up so we can see the shoreline. And this is the first time I've actually done this. And I'm flying instruments at 1,000 feet over the water, which makes zero sense. Can't see anything. It's nighttime. And I remember we're in the clouds. We were in the clouds within a couple hundred feet, and we cruise down there. So it takes, I don't know, 45 minutes to get down there. So first of all, I'm just working just to make sure I don't look like an idiot, right? I want to impress the rest of the crew that I'm a decent pilot, right? Because I'm new. And so I'm flying IFR down there, and we get ready. We get down there, and we go to shoot a catch, which, as you know, but just for your listeners, I'll mention, is a coupled approach to a controlled hover, which is like you program the aircraft up, and you can shoot essentially an instrument approach to anywhere that has a GPS point. So you put the GPS point in where we think these kayakers are, and we're getting really close to the shoreline, so we're super nervous, right? Like, we don't know. We're okay shooting a catch down when we can't see anything over the water, but once we get close to the shoreline, there's obstacles and stuff that we're worried about. So we decide we're going to shoot this catch a couple of 100 yards off of where this marsh is that they're supposedly in, and we're going to drive in at 50 feet real slow. So theoretically, we're going to break out of the clouds, right? Before we get
at 50 feet.
Yeah. And so we program up this catch, and meanwhile, I've already been working my tail off, right? Like, in terms of the amount of concentration it takes to stay. You're working when you're flying instruments, and so we program up this catch, and this is the first one I've done for real. Like, I've done practice ones, and I'm expecting that we're going to break out, and we don't break out, man. We get to 50 feet, and I'm expecting the other pilot to say, "I'm visual. I have the controls," and he never says that. And for a moment, I think that he forgets. So I like glance up, and sure enough, we can't see jack. Like it's like we're still in our searchlight, we can see just white, right? And so we drive in, and we don't see anything. So just like the protocol, I hit the go around button. We climb back out, turn back towards the ocean, and I can tell he's a little like surprised we didn't break out either, and the mech as well. And we're like, we're not going to do another one of those, because it was, us driving towards the shore 50 feet, not being able to see, we were pretty uncomfortable. So we called the Coast Guard rescue the radio watch standard, and we say, hey, we shot an approach and we didn't break out, and we're not going to be able to help these two kids. You're going to have to send a boat. And so I think that's the most significant thing that's going to happen that night, because we shot a catch and didn't break out, and it was fairly nerve wracking. But I was kidding myself. Things were about to get a whole lot more exciting. So we fly instruments back north, utilizing the radar to stay offshore. And at some point we decide, okay, we're up with ATC. Let's just climb back up into the normal instrument profile, and we'll shoot an ILS into Charleston, where we're stationed, and recover Charleston Executive. So we climb up. We're talking ATC. I think at this time we're at 5,000 feet or something probably. And still I'm flying instruments. At this point, I've been flying for 2 hours instruments, and we go to shoot this ILS, and the field is calling roughly, I think it was like 100-foot ceiling. So it's really questionable. We're probably not going to break out. And so we have enough fuel, we think, to shoot 2 approaches. So we brief it internally, and we decide we'll shoot the first approach. And if we don't break out, we'll do a mist, come back around. And at that point, we'll have to declare an emergency, because as you likely are aware, we can shoot an approach to 50 feet over the runway, but you have to declare an emergency for that, because it's not a certified procedure. And so we're supposed to do the normal procedure first, unless so that's the plan. We're going to shoot this normal ILS, see if we break out. If we don't break out, we'll come back around, declare an emergency, and shoot a catch to 50 feet. So, an approach to the runway at 50 feet. So now I'm like, holy cow, I'm still having earned my money here tonight on my first SAR case. And so, and Rich, bless his heart, he's still over there just managing everything, and I'm still flying. And so, which was great. Like I'm just working. And so we shoot this ILS. And there's a little side story I have to tell you real quick, which is wild. One of our other crews, who was supposed to be doing night bounces on a ship off of Charleston out of Savannah, the weather had gotten so bad, so they had actually recovered to the airfact. And now that I think about it, maybe that's why the Savannah crew wasn't available. Maybe they were training on the ship, and that's why we got sent to Savannah. So this crew I remember one of the crew members, his name was Corey Braddock, one of the pilots, and so he had landed at the airfact, he and his crew, and he knew we were out on SAR case in terrible weather, because he had also shot an instrument approach back in earlier. And he tells a story later of standing out on the ramp, witnessing and listening to all this happen, which I'm about to tell you as we're shooting these approaches. So we go, unbeknownst to me that he's out there listening, but that was what was happening. I found out later. So we shoot this approach, this ILS, into Charleston Executive, and man, we don't break out. Like, I remember briefly, Rich Bates was like, I'm visual, I have the controls. And then he's like, oh crap, not visual, you have the controls again. And so briefly he could see maybe some runway lights, and then he lost them. So we climb back out, do the mist, and we're thinking, okay, no big deal. We're getting really low on gas, but we're going to declare an emergency. We have enough, and we're going to shoot another approach in here, and this time we'll program it to 50 feet. So we're flying around talking to ATC. We're like, we did not break out, executing the mist. And we said we'd like to declare an emergency and shoot an approach back into another ILS back into there, and we're going to program up our computer to come to a lower hover. We don't tell approach that. We're just like, we declare emergency, we like another approach. And he says, no problem, you'll be number 2. I have a Cessna that's currently on the approach. And he says, break. And he's talking to the Cessna in November or whatever. I don't remember, because I'm working my tail off still over here just trying to fly instruments. And he says, November so-and-so, the helicopter ahead of you, the Coast Guard helicopter, did not break out. State your intentions. And I remember the pilot said, we'd like to still do the approach. And so I heard that, and then we're getting vectored around, and then all of a sudden approach says, I can't give you Charleston Executive anymore. And I'm like, what? We're like getting low on fuel. And he says, yeah, there's been a reported fire on the runway, and I'm not hearing back from the aircraft, so we think there's been an accident.
The Cessna.
The Cessna. And sure enough, man.
No.
Sure enough, so Corey Braddock later tells the story as he's standing out at the airfac at the runway listening. He hears us go over. You know, the coast the 65 whine, right? He hears that whine in the clouds. Yeah, and never. Yeah, he thought, we don't break out, so we fly by. He sees us in the clouds, and he's standing there waiting for us to come back and do it again. And he said the next thing he sees is just emerge out of the clouds at 100 feet is this airplane, and it just hits the runway and balls up. And he said the visibility was terrible. And so come to find out, super sad. This is a doctor and I think his wife, if I remember right, and they died. They burned in on the runway that night. And yeah, and so we hear about this accident, and and I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. But at the same time, I'm like suddenly realizing we are low on fuel, and so we have to get. And I'll never forget the controller says to us, I can't give you executive. Can you take international? And international's not that far. It's like another 20. It's like a 20-minute difference. And Richard Bates replies to him and says, I'll take any airport you can give me. I barely have enough fuel to get to international. And the ATC guy, the next thing he says is, Roger, turn heading, I don't know what it was, maybe 025. It was like a direct, he's going to give us an early cut into an ILS into international. And then he says, break, Delta so-and-so. I need you to hold at whatever the fix was. I have a Coast Guard helicopter that's declared emergency low fuel. So he's holding a passenger airplane going into international while we're trying to get in to break out. And so the rest of the story was we programmed, we're like, this is it. We're like, I think we had we were definitely into our reserve. We were going to end up landing in international with 100 pounds of gas, which is 10 minutes in a 65. So, and this wasn't our plan. You can't plan to land with less than 200. But at this point, we had a couple of issues, right, emergencies, and so we ended up shooting the approach and breaking out. Thank goodness. We were going to we had programmed it up to come to a 50-foot hover over the runway, but we broke out at I want to say 150 feet or so, right under the 200-foot ILS for Charleston International. And when we shut down, we had 100 pounds of gas. And I remember being sweating, dude. I had just been flying IFR for 3 hours, and coming from the Army, I had flown some IFR, but nothing like that. We're cruising over the ocean at 1,000 feet, using our radar to stay offshore, declaring emergencies. Some airplane crashes and dies in front of us, and then it was total emotional event. And I remember being exhausted, and we're in our dry suits, and I had a go bag, but all I had, and it was a toothbrush and an MRE. So we all slept in our dry suits in the FBO that night at Charleston International, I remember. But anyway, that was my emotional. We didn't even rescue anybody, and it was this big emotional event for Tombo, the new pilot to the Coast Guard. So.
Holy shit, Tombo, dude!
Yeah, that was
welcome to the Coast Guard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we fly in some crazy stuff. There's no doubt about that. That's crazy. To have a Cessna be following in behind you and ball up, that's terrible. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was super sad later to when we had time to stop and think about it and process it and not worry about whether we were going to make it. It was super sad to learn about and hear about. Yeah.
Oh, what a day. Holy
yeah,
smoke.
It was just telling the story. I'm getting a little I don't know, tight in the chest. It was an emotional event for me. Yeah, I was working, but
yeah, dang. Well done. I'm glad you got it on the ground safely for sure, because that's one heck of a day. My goodness.
Yeah.
Do you know if the kids got saved?
They did. The small boat picked them up later. Yeah. The funny part was. In Almas, which is our logbook recording. Missile. Missile was the SAR case recording where we would go in and put what we did, right? And as the co-pilot, I had to fill it out, and it was totally embarrassing because I felt like I had worked really, really hard. We had worked really, really hard as a crew, and I had to put launched on this case, 0 lives saved, and that was it. There was no place in there to put it was a significant emotional event. Another airplane crashed. We had to shoot an emergency approach. There was none of that. It was just you launched, you didn't save anything. Good day. Anyway, which was hilarious.
It's like a wah, wah, wah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's terrible. I shouldn't even be laughing. This is not funny. That's terrible. we're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Breeze Eastern. For over 80 years, Breeze Eastern has designed and manufactured battle-proven aerial rescue hoists, winches, and cargo hooks. Each product is carefully crafted to support demanding mission scenarios, ensuring the job gets done safely and efficiently. Visit them today at www.breeze-eastern.com.
But I get it. Like you when we talk about flying in 0-0, for anybody that doesn't understand, it's like I don't even know if you can explain it, because it's truly entirely fogged in. You see nothing but white in every direction. The only reason you know you're flat level or your wings level is your instruments are wings level. That's the only way you know. When you're in a turn and you see the slight bank and the little airplane moves, and you're like, hey, look, I'm turning. It's gnarly. Straight up gnarly. Yeah. So
it's wild. And our brains are just not designed for that type of environment. Like, our brains want to feel, they want to feel things. Our inner ears want to tell us that we're turning when we're not, or that we're descending when we're not. Like, it's very easy for, a human to get themselves in a really bad situation if they're not really good about trusting their instruments and being able to scan their instruments to understand, what attitude the aircraft's in. And so, the more we do that, the better skilled we get at it. But sometimes, if we're not careful and we're not paying close attention, things can sneak up on us. And that's why it's kind of an emotional event when you're wanting to pay really close attention. Yeah.
So one of the things I remember specifically about the H-65 was always having the flight mech. So the way the cockpit is, or the cabin is set up, is you get your two pilots up front, and there's pretty much an open space in the middle. And the flight mechanic, your hoist operator, sits directly behind, like in that middle seat. And his seat slides back and forth, left to right, swivels. I'm in the swimmer in the back. I'm sleeping. Oh, Jules coming out a little bit over here. I'll admit it. Come on, Tombo. Yeah. My legs are up on my swimmer bag. Whatever. But the flight mechanic is in a good spot where he's in the middle, and actually he has, like, one of his kind of backup jobs is to watch the instruments, and he knows what he's looking at, and he can, hey, sir, we got a nose down. Hey, sir, we got a wings right. I feel it. And the acknowledgement of that third person who's not even on controls is just that extra set of eyes, that backup, that feeling, and it's nice to have. So, yeah.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And I've had some incredible, flight mechs that have really taken a serious vested interest in performing that role, especially when you're like, it's different when you're hoisting. Like, they're the ones that are doing, a ton of work trying to make sure we are where we're supposed to be, directing the crew. But you're right, when you're on instruments in forward flight, I've had a couple of instances where we're searching, for example, or we're en route to a scene, and it's, you can't see anything, 100 miles offshore, black, can't see a horizon at night. And you're relying upon that altimeter. And I've had mechs tell me, like, hey, I think, the altimeter, the radar altimeter lights, hey, sir, we got, we just passed through 250 feet, whatever we briefed, right? Like, for the radar bug, because maybe I'm like looking at the checklist or talking on the radio and didn't notice it, or I've had them, suggest that we're in a descent, because they look at the VSI and can see that we're in a 500 foot or 200 foot rate of descent or something over the ocean that's not noticeable, right? And maybe we were on autopilot and it came off. Like, those are some examples of that. And I love in the 65 how involved the flight mech is with, or the pilots are with the flight mech with the pilots, because we're sitting so close. You're right. Like, we're so close that when we're operating, sometimes we're physically, like, feeling each other's presence. Because like when they grab the pilot seat to move themselves in the cabin or whatever, like, you can feel it, like, a little bit, right?
Hey, don't be grabbing that seat. I'm trying to operate the helicopter here.
Or if they have a comms failure, that's the best thing in the world. They just slap you on the shoulder, right there, and then they start hollering because you're sitting so close to each other. Like, you can tell. Whereas you don't, in the 60, you have a lot more distance and you can't see as well, right? So,
right. No, your crew chief, I'm talking Army now, your crew chief actually has to, like, almost walk up to the front of the aircraft or sit in that middle and be watching. And that's the only way they can help. So, but I just kind of a little plug for the flight mechanic there, because I think it's important to note that, and you have a third set of eyes, and it's one of the nice things about that aircraft. So we'll give the 65 that little, hey, nice job, guys. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Hey, you actually had one more, a bit of a funny rescue that happened to you in Savannah, and I just want to hear about it, like a little more detail. You and I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I want to hear the whole thing.
Yeah, this is just kind of a fun case. At the time, thinking about like, I think in the Coast Guard, we all love our job and being able to help people. So we have a little bit of an empathetic nature anyway, right? And so to always try to put yourself in the shoes of the people you're rescuing, and in this particular case, being able to appreciate how scary it might have been for them is to look back on. It's kind of funny. So what it was there were we got a call off Savannah, and it was way offshore. I want to say it was like 100 miles because I remember we flew for a long time to get there. But we had a call for a boat that was sinking, and it was a recreational. I don't remember the length of it, but a recreational boat that was sinking. And so we got a decent lat long. We're flying out there, and by the time we get 100 miles out, there's been drift. Maybe their GPS position was, 2 hours ago. By the time we get all the way out there, and it was daytime conditions, so that was great. But we go to conduct our search pattern. We get on scene, we drop our data marker buoy so we can get a drift later, and we start our search. And we go through this entire search with the amount of fuel we have, which is not a lot. We get about through the search, and we still haven't found them, which is a little bit concerning that they're that far offshore. The boat was sinking last we heard. We're not in radio comms with them anymore, and we're on the last leg. And we're all kind of looking for debris, looking for a boat, or maybe a head floating in the water, because when somebody's in the water, that's usually all you can see, and it's kind of hard to find that.
Yeah.
And no kidding, we're on the last leg, and we all of a sudden we all see it at the same time. Like we fly over. There's two people. We don't notice them until we're like maybe a few hundred yards away, and as we fly over them, you can see the entire boat. Like it's underneath the surface, so we couldn't see it. But it's maybe 5 foot under the surface, and they're kind of standing in it wearing life jackets. But the bad part was our bingo's flashing, which for the folks that aren't familiar with what that is, that there's a flight computer that does a really nice job of taking into account how much fuel we have remaining in order to get back to refuel the aircraft, to make it back to land, or a ship or wherever we're trying to get back. But so we had programmed in where we wanted to recover to. And it's telling us like, you're already banking into borrowed time, because I think it was flashing like -5 minutes, and so we're like, hey, it's time to go. And terrible timing. Like we have to leave. Yeah. Like we need to go get fuel, and we just found these two folks, and you could see they're like holding their arms up. They're just elated that we found them.
Like yes, they found us. Go Coast Guard.
We're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Right? That's what they're thinking.
I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I'm paying taxes from now on. Let's go, Coast Guard!
I'm sure that's what they're thinking, right? And we're like, crap. We barely even have time to do anything. And so we had a drop radio, which, as you well know, is essentially a radio that's in a waterproof bag that has some instructions on how to turn it on, and it's already set to the right frequency. And we literally fly over at like 35 knots because we're afraid to come to a hover because like we're borrowed time. Hover takes more fuel. We just fly over at 35 knots, toss this thing out, and then just climb back out to 120 knots and head back westbound. And so I'm imagining these dudes as they're trying to fumble through this radio and watch us just disappear, fly off into the distance. And sure enough, they come up on the radio, man, and they are alarmed. They're like, the first thing they say is, "Hey, where are you guys going?" And I'll never forget. I had to call it back, and I was like, "Hey, I'm really sorry. We are out of gas. We can't help you right now." And I'm trying to talk to, and they are traumatized. They're like, "What do you mean? You can't leave us here?" And it's starting to get dark, and I'm like, "Hey, the good news is we marked your position. I think we actually might have. No, we had already deployed our data marker boost, so we didn't have that. But anyway." You have a radio now. We marked your position. We're going to come back, but it's going to be a couple hours. So y'all going to have to hang in there. And they were like, "You got to be kidding me. Oh my gosh." Anyway, when we came back later that night, it was a pretty uneventful rescue, and they were excited. But at the time, they were pretty upset and traumatized that here's this, they finally been, we're about to be saved. And then the Coast Guard helo flies off into the sunset. Right. So anyway, that was one of those I look back on. I was like, those poor guys that we found them and then had to leave. Must have been a traumatic event. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That is just a little bit funny.
Yeah, in some of those instances, we would leave the swimmer on scene, right? Like to be there with them, like with a raft. But we did not have time to deploy any of that. We were just so worried about our bingo. So we had to leave them with the radio and come back later. But it was fun.
Hey, at least you went back to get them. That's really nice of you.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, we got you. It'll be a couple hours, but we got you.
We won't forget. Yeah.
Right. That's when you call back on the radio, like, "Hey, rumor had it you owed somebody money. I'm not sure where that came from, but
yeah, hold over their heads." Yeah.
They'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna pay." Oh, it's terrible. I'm sorry. That is pretty funny though. I like that.
Yeah, it was a fun game.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Now you move on to Mobile, Alabama, and Mobile is a training unit for. I know we've talked about it a little bit here, but there's only really one story I want to bring up in Mobile. If you have another one, you're more than welcome to bring it. But you go out flying and you have a cadet with you in the aircraft. And you know what? Take it. You tell the story because I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's speaking of significant emotional events, it's another one. But first of all, let me just say, Mobile was a great tour. I was fairly junior Coast Guard rank wise, but coming from the Army, I had a fair amount of flying experience, and I just loved being at the schoolhouse teaching. Like it was such a rewarding experience, and the team we had there, between the phenomenal mechs and the instruction they're giving on stand visits and the stand visits that we're doing, it was just a wonderful experience. I felt like I was just amongst professionals. You already get that in the Coast Guard at regular units, but to be at the schoolhouse where everybody is just focused on being as studied as they can be on everything about the aircraft and helping write the manuals and teaching was just a phenomenal experience. But one of the things, so speaking of this particular event, one of the things is that the Coast Guard Academy has a program where these cadets, they're going to be future officers, get to go around, they're sent to different Coast Guard duty stations and get to kind of learn the trade, I think is the intent behind it.
Nice.
And so, sometimes they go and they get to ride on small boats or get to go ride on cutters or go to sectors and learn about how, Rescue 21 works or whatever. But in this particular case, they get sent to Mobile, and somebody in their wisdom in the history of writing Coast Guard regulations had written in that cadets could fly an aircraft, a Coast Guard aircraft, under the conditions of and I don't remember all the conditions, but they had to be with an instructor, which was this case. They're flying with me as well as my flight mech, and they had to be. They couldn't fly particularly in the 65. They weren't, if I remember right, they weren't allowed to hover. They can only fly above 500 feet, and maybe 500 feet was the general Coast Guard rule. But anyway, they can fly above 500 feet, which was essentially cruising straight and level flight, which generally speaking is for helicopters kind of similar to an airplane, right? Once you're in forward flight, going like it's a cyclic instead of a typical airplane controls. But it's basically like flying an airplane. You would think it's fairly simple. So I go out with this cadet. My flight mech is Scott Trowbridge, and we have his history together. He was great. Scott's a fairly quiet guy, super professional though, and he'd flown with me with a lot of students doing hoisting, which is what you do a lot in Mobile with not with cadets, but with folks that are already qualified new pilots to the Coast Guard. In this case, we got this cadet, and we I have two cadets. I have one cadet two that I'm supposed to fly. One had just flown, and then the other one, she gets up front. We land at a particular airport. They swap out. She gets in the front. I take us off. We climb up to 500 feet, and actually, now that I think about it, we climbed 1,000 feet, and we're flying. We're flying over Mobile Bay somewhere, and we're headed back to finish the flight. So we're headed back into the airport's airspace in Mobile, which is a towered airspace. So we're getting ready to talk to the tower, and I'm getting ready to talk to the tower. and she's flying, and we're cruising along at pretty good speed, I think about 110 knots. And because we're going to get ready to descend, I want her to slow down. And so I say, go ahead and slow back to about 80 knots. And she pulls back on the cyclic, and I recognize the attitude of the aircraft is more like a 60 knot attitude instead of an 80 knot attitude. And she doesn't have any way of knowing but I say, this is the last thing I remember saying was, that's a little bit too much. Not quite that nose high, I think is what I said. And the next thing I know, Jason, I have this sensation in my stomach, like we're like negative G's. Everything's floating all of a sudden. I'm wearing one of those old school knee boards that's got like a flap on the side, and it comes from the relaxed position just straight up. Like it's I remember it's straight up. My stomach's in my throat, and all I can see out the front windscreen is green, like earth. And I had, when you're an instructor, they teach you, especially when you're hoisting, but I had, naturally had my cyclic arm sitting on my leg right next to the cyclic. And we're massively in some kind of nose down attitude. And I go to reach for the cyclic, and it's not there. Like I swipe from right to left to try to grab it, and it's not there. The first time I reach for it, it's so far forward that it's not in the normal position. I miss it. So then I reach forward and grab it. And I remember thinking to myself, don't pull back too fast, because it's conceivable in the negative G that I could strike the tail boom somehow. And trying, at the time, I'm just like flooded with, all this is happening really quick, and I don't want to be too aggressive on the controls because I'm really worried about what's happening with the aircraft. And I grab a cyclic, and I try to slowly pull back enough to start getting a load on the head, because we're still doing negative G. And I'm getting a load on the head, and sure enough, man, as soon as I get the aircraft back righted, it over-torques. And so dink, that's the sound you hear in the 65 when you over-torque. And the collective had never moved through the course of the flight because I had the collective. But because we had suddenly gone from a negative G to so much of a load on the head, it caused it to over-torque. And and the next thing I heard was Scott Trowbridge say, "Jesus Christ, sir, tell me you have the controls." And then the other cadet, he says, "Damn it," this cadet's name, which is why I remember her name to this day. And he says, "Damn it," so-and-so. And I'm like, holy cow, what just happened? And I'm trying to gather myself and figure out, okay, we're straight and level. The aircraft seems to be okay. We just had an over torque. And I remember thinking, holy cow, I've flown in combat, and that's the scariest I've ever been, thinking it was over. Like, and so later on, come to find out, and I feel terrible for her, because she's new to the aircraft. I didn't do a good job of explaining things to her. What ended up happening, Jason, was we have a mag clutch on the cyclic, which essentially keeps the cyclic in a position. Use magnets to keep it in a position, so that you can actually let go of the cyclic and it won't fall over dead, like a dead stick. It won't fall over and cause the aircraft to turn and so what had happened was, I found out later, when I told her that was more like a 60, that was going to be too slow to don't slow down that much. She started putting pressure on the cyclic, and then she pressed that button. And so when it released, cyclic, so it released the mag clutches and the cyclic, and she had pressure on it. It just dumped all the way forward. I mean, literally to the MFD, like to the control panel. And so we ended up pulling the Vader to determine exactly what happened and to see if we had exceeded any limits. And in the 65, the 30 degrees is the limit for nose down, and we had reached 33 degrees. But what was so significant was we had done so in 3/4 of a second, because it records in quarter-second intervals. So we had gone from this nose up attitude to 33 degrees nose down in 3/4 of a second. And I mean, I'm embarrassed by it to this day. I'm the instructor. I'm the one that's supposed to be like doing a good job of making sure that she has a good experience to learn about what aviation is like, that the rest of the crew, which happens to be me and Scott in this case, and the other cadet, I guess, would count in that, are all, being taken care of, the aircraft's being taken care of. And I clearly failed in that aspect. But significant emotional event, over-torqued the aircraft. I don't know where this cadet went. I wonder if she, I hope if she, wanted to fly aviation, that she still flew and wasn't scared from this. But it was an embarrassing and significant emotional event. So that was the scariest thing that happened to me at Mobile.
Oh my gosh. All I'm thinking about is like when you get to the top of the roller coaster and you drop and you're like, put your hands up, let's go. And that's not what you needed to do.
No, dude. No. When it catches you off guard
Holy
like that too, you're just like, oh my God. Yeah. Like, it's, and for me to reach for the cyclic and not be there, that was also pretty wild. But, yeah, it's fortunately, an inspection revealed there was no damage done, but there was certainly some damage done to my ego as an instructor and jaded about flying with cadets. The next week they wanted to put me with another cadet, and I was like, if you want them to be able to operate the controls, you probably need to give me a couple more weeks and send them with somebody else. I'm not feeling very good right now, but so it's pretty fun. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Oh,
well,
the funny
really
thing
nice
was,
of you. Yeah.
Yeah, the funny thing was the next cadet I got, which was like 3 weeks later, because this was during the summer, Scott Trowbridge, the same flight mech, signed up to be on the flight. Like he was like, and I was like, Scott, you gonna fly with me again with a cadet? And he's like, well, I figure if anybody can keep that from happening again because they've experienced it and it was significant, he said it would be you. I feel sure it's going to be a super benign flight now. So, and it was. Yeah. Scott was a good sport. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's totally great. Nice. Hey, thank you so much for sharing that. That's pretty funny. I like that. I gotta bring us into Humboldt Bay, right? Because that was your next unit, right? And because of your time in the U.S. Army and then transitioning into the Coast Guard, this is your twilight tour. So you did a couple years there, or a couple years. You did a tour there, and then done with the United States military, right?
Yeah. So, retired out of there. A great experience. Yeah.
We're gonna divert real quick to thank our sponsors. The RealRescueStore.com. Your shop for all your podcast-worthy gear. From comfortable shirts to cozy mugs, we've got everything to showcase your love for your favorite podcast. So what are you waiting for? Head to the RealRescueStore.com and let your gear do the talking. I love it. Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about two rescues that I have. If you have any more, you're more than welcome to drop them in. But these two in particular, you got a couple write-ups for. And I'm excited. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go in numerical order. So we're going to start with February 6th, 2015. And I'll just get right into it. Then you can give us the rundown. All right?
Yeah.
From Commandant to Lieutenant Commander Thomas Jones, USCG. Subject, Letter of Commendation. I note with pride and am pleased to commend you on your performance of duty while serving as pilot in command aboard Coast Guard Helicopter 6558 on 6 February 2015. Sector Humboldt Bay received a request to conduct a medevac from Dinsmore, California, of an 88-year-old woman in critical condition who was suffering from pneumonia and respiratory failure. Severe weather had precluded her transport via ambulance as the mountain roads were flooded by torrential rains. Reports of severe turbulence in the area, along with low visibility, heavy rain, and winds exceeding 50 knots required your crew to formulate a plan to airlift the patient from the mountainous Dinsmore Airport at over 3,000 feet. After embarking the flight surgeon, you led your crew up the Mad River Valley, orientated with the predominant wind, vice the obvious choice of the Van Duzen River Valley, helping to minimize the turbulence. You guided your crew through conditions as low as 1/4 mile visibility, flying slowly to permit the identification of subsequent mountain spurs through the driving rain before proceeding ahead. In addition, you coached your crew in hugging the high ridge on one side of the valley, minimizing exposure to high wires and allowing for escape route to the valley center in case the loss of ground references. You were nearly forced to turn back on 3 occasions due to low visibility, and you staunchly encouraged your crew to remain alert for a charted set of high-tension power lines near the evacuation site. After conducting a detailed map study of the surrounding terrain, you safely picked up the patient and skillfully used the valley on departure to safely establish a corridor for a maximum climb-out gradient ascent in 0 visibility conditions. Flying instruments in near icing conditions, you delivered the patient to the hospital, ultimately saving her life from what was later diagnosed as a cardiac embolism. You're commended for your outstanding performance of duty. By your meritorious service, you've upheld the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. Holy smoke. All right, so you got a letter of commendation for that. I've seen write-ups that are not nearly like that bad, that have gotten higher awards. And again, we don't do it for the awards, but holy cow, 1/4 mile visibility up through the valley, following ridge lines just to get there. Jeez. Okay. How and why did that even happen? So I was stationed in Humboldt Bay too. So I was there, and I know where Dinsmore, California is. And it's a trek to get in there. And I get it. I totally get it. And the fog out in Humboldt is ridiculous. So how did that even happen?
Yeah, it was kind of a wild SAR case. A couple of things. You mentioned the fog in Humboldt. For folks that don't know, I think that I had read one time that each year it kind of swaps with Astoria, Oregon, as one of the foggiest places in the United States. And Humboldt averages like 275 days of fog a year. And you know,
it's crazy.
Sometimes in your early, learning about how weather works, you don't think that you can have high winds and fog, but Humboldt proves that wrong, right? Because of the cold water, and then the warmer air coming from the southwest tends to. It's crazy. Like you can have fog and that's blowing past you, at a rapid rate. So this particular day, it had been raining for a couple of days. It was one of those days where. One of those storms in Northern California where it just like dumps and just sideways wind. And I remember coming onto duty and thinking like, I sure hope, at the time I was thinking, I sure hope no boaters are out, right? Certainly it's going to be a significant traumatic event if we get to go out in this particular weather conditions to fly a rescue case. And I was thinking offshore, but as you well know, Jason, from being in Humboldt, there's a lot of inland rescue type stuff that happens because the weather's so bad that we used to get a lot of air evacs too that typically would be done by Part 135 operators in other places in the United States, but that they don't fly there because the fog's so bad and the weather's so bad and it's mountainous. And so this SAR case came in, and we were fortunate because being stationed in Humboldt, we oftentimes got to go to AHARS, which I had been to, which is a great school for really teaching swimmers and flight mechs and pilots on how to deal with hoisting in dangerous conditions. But and we didn't hoist on this particular SAR case. But in addition to that school, the Coast Guard also sends pilots to HATS, which is an Army school for high altitude flying. And the thing about HATS,
what's the definition? I don't know.
What's the acronym stand for? I can't remember what HAT stands for. Let me look it up real quick, because I think it's the HA is high altitude. It's kind of near it's in Colorado at kind of near Vail, Colorado, out that direction. I think it may be in Gypsum is where HATS is, but let me look up what the acronym is. High altitude aviation training site is what it says here.
Okay.
And so the thing about that school, it's only a week-long school, but it's so great because it teaches you how to think about how high winds affect your aircraft performance at altitude, or lack thereof wind, either way, and how the winds might act in a mountainous environment. And so it was very valuable. In Humboldt, we did a lot of inland rescues, and so at high altitudes, and so it's very valuable for us to be able to take those lessons learned and apply them to SAR cases or flying in the mountains. And this was the case here. So we get this we get this call comes in through the 911 center to Humboldt, and there had been a lot of flooding from all the rain, and it was like super windy as the award suggested in the readout there, and they were calling
50 knots. That's no
joke. So they were calling for moderate turbulence, which moderate for those who don't know, it really matters. Like moderate turbulence doesn't really. We fly a really light aircraft, so it could be moderate turbulence for a Boeing 777, right? But it could be significant turbulence for us, and so, and that's because of the 50-knot winds happening across the mountainous region there. And so we're trying to figure out. This call comes in. There'd been a lot of flooding. This lady was having this ambulance couldn't get past. This bridge was flooded out, is what it was, and in the Dinsmore Valley, and they couldn't figure out how to get her out of there. So they called the Coast Guard because they didn't have any other options. And we're looking.
Has a helicopter, and they're willing to fly in quarter-mile visibility. Yeah. Just gonna throw that out there.
Terrible weather conditions, yeah. So we meet with the ops boss. We talk about what the best plan here is. Problem number one is that Dinsmore, in addition to the turbulence problem, is that Dinsmore doesn't have instrument approaches. So there's an airport there, and we decide we're going to rendezvous with the ambulance at the airport. But there's no instrument approaches, so you can't like fly an instrument approach, and it's deep in the mountains. It's I think it's like 3,000-foot mountains on either side. And so we end up going. We look at this case, and the flight surgeon hears about this, and he comes over and he's like, "Hey, I'd really like to go on this flight with y'all because this lady, as we're carrying her, it'd be good to have my first aid experience." Or somebody decides that. I don't know if Captain Sanchez had decided that or not. But so suddenly I found out we've got the flight surgeon going to fly with us, and so it's me. The co-pilot's name is Cameron Willeka. Great dude. And then Rob LaFosse was my flight mech. And I'm smiling because Rob and I flew a lot of SAR cases together, and I'll just put a quick plug in. The dirtiest joke I've ever heard in my life was told to me at 2 a.m. while flying a SAR case by Rob LaFosse. And we'll just leave it at that. But what a colorful dude. He's a ride.
I can't wait to hear the joke. We might have to do it offline, but I really want to hear the joke.
Yep. And then our rescue swimmer was Ben Brown. We'll definitely have to do that joke offline. That joke is not appropriate to even be told to. Yeah. So, but it was a good one. And if Rob's listening, I'm sure he remembers it. But and then the flight mech was Ben Brown, and so we ended up we were going to have a crew of 5. So the first thing we did was Willeka goes out to the aircraft with the flight mate with Rob, and they pulled into a hover to try to burn off 50 pounds of gas, I think it was, real quick, so that we can, because we figured out we were going to be a little bit too heavy. Dinsmore wasn't a long way away, but it was, if you're flying 120 knots, it would probably take 20 minutes to get there. But in this particular case, because the visibility was so terrible, we weren't able to do that. And I'll talk a little bit in a minute about how we approached it. So while he's doing that, I'm in the command center with the ops boss, and we're talking, and the most obvious way to get to Dinsmore is up the same valley that Dinsmore's in, which we can go up the Eel River Valley and then follow the valley that Dinsmore's in. I think it was the Van Dusen or something. Yep. I may have that incorrect, but anyway, there was a valley that went straight to Dinsmore.
So according to this, you went up the Mad River Valley instead of the Van Dusen River Valley.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah,
so naturally,
that was the choice.
Yep, perfect. Thanks. So naturally, if you were going to fly to Dinsmore and not want to cross mountains, for example, to get into there, you would just follow the Van Dusen River up from the ocean, essentially, and or from the coastal region. But the problem with that was these 50-knot winds. The direction of the 50-knot winds was going to cause that to be a very difficult flight. We were going to get our world rocked because the winds would be the way the valley was oriented. We would have the winds would be coming essentially down the valley and having strike points that would cause us to just be, it would have been very bad turbulence wise. So what we decided to do, we're looking at the Mad River Valley, which is at a different angle. And the Mad River Valley would allow us to fly up towards Dinsmore and utilize the I guess it was the southernmost mountain wall, essentially the southernmost mountain as kind of a windshield. And so the wind would cross over the top of us and strike the other mountain on the other side of the valley, but where we could hug that what would be the northern facing slope on the southern mountain and be protected from the wind. That's what we were thinking and trying to do here. And so we're like, yep, we're going to take the Mad River Valley up. We're going to hug that side of the mountain so that we're not getting our world rocked with these massive winds in the mountains. But the problem was we knew we were going to have to cross that mountain when we got up near Dinsmore to get over into the Van Dusen River Valley. And so our plan was to cruise all the way up, and we were going to cross the mountain right there at Dinsmore. But there was a set of power lines that ran along that along that mountain ridge, and we were concerned about those power lines, right? Because when you're flying in really bad weather conditions, not being able to see very well, helicopters are super susceptible to wires, and I've been taught that initially since flight school. In flight school, they teach you all roads have wires, which is generally true. But in this case, this mountain ridge had a wire, which we could see on the map, a set of wires. And so we briefed the crew on it, briefed everybody up. There was a set of wires we're going to have to cross. Our plan is to cruise up this river valley. And we start up this river valley. We take off from the airport. We get over the Mad River. And the weather conditions at the airport, they were fluctuating from between like 3/4 of a mile down to a quarter. It was back and forth. Just so happened that when we launched out, it wasn't terrible. It was like maybe 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile. So we could see a decent distance, but not great. And so we're not flying instruments in this case. We're flying VFR because there were no instruments to get us into there. And so we start cruising up the valley, and we start hugging the side of the wall, the side of the mountain to protect us because we were getting rocked a little bit as we were trying to get up into the beginning of the valley. And I remember in the Army, I had this warrant officer. His name was CW4 Lovell, and CW4 is pretty high rank, a lot of aviation experience. And I was flying with him when I was a super junior pilot one time, and he said he was talking about flying low level flight, nap of the earth, NOE. And he taught me. He said, "Don't ever outfly your eyes." And what he meant by that was slow down. You can fly this thing at 30 knots, and
yeah,
there's no sense in bombing through conditions when you can't see very well when you're flying really close to obstacles and stuff. Don't outfly, don't outpace how quickly you can see an obstacle and avoid it. So, and he was talking about low level night flight at that time, but it applied very much here. So I tell Waleka, and we're discussing it with the rest of the crew. I'm like, let's just fly up this thing at 35 knots. We're in a hurry to rescue this lady, but we need to make sure we make it there, which is, kind of one of those things we have to remind ourselves in the Coast Guard, right? And so we're literally crawling up this valley at like 35 knots. And what was crazy about the visibility was not only was it super windy and we were, trying not to get rocked too bad, but Waleka would be in the clouds at some point in the fog. And he would say, at his side, he would say, I can see some more trees ahead. I'm doing good. I see the next spur. So on, each little, like their little ridges on the side of the mountain, spurs. And he would say, all right, I got the next spur. And then he would say, oh, I can't see anything. I'm IMC. And I would be looking at my side and I'm like, oh, okay, I can still see the mountain. And we flip-flop like this a couple times. And we had briefed that if both of us went IMC, we were just going to do a left turn in this big valley. And then we're going to climb into clouds and accept the turbulence and have to shoot an empty approach back. So that was our escape plan. But fortunately, we didn't have to use it. We were able to, each little spur, crawl along. One of us could see at each point. There were times where certainly one of us couldn't see. But and we get up. This is slightly amusing. We get up and I'm telling everybody, I'm like, okay, we're about to cross over the mountain now because we are adjacent to Dinsmore according to our MFD. Like we can tell that it's right over the ridge here to the airport, and so we're going to climb over. And I'm like, we're looking for these wires because we don't know if the wires are above the tree line, beneath the tree line, whatever. And given the fog we were in, we certainly were concerned about them. And I'll never forget, we're like, okay, we're about to cross the mountaintop. Everybody be looking for the wires. And Ben, our rescue swimmer, how it's designed, the 65, he's looking out the right. Yeah. Rob LaFosse is helping look out the left with the co-pilot, and I'm looking out the right because I'm in the right seat. And I'm flying, I remember, and Waleka proclaims in about the loudest voice I've ever heard that he sees the wires, and he said it so loud it scared the tar out of me. Like I thought we were about to hit him. Like the way he was like, I see the wires, over ICS, and they were not a factor. They were under us, thank goodness. But I was like, daggum, Waleka, Cameron. Anyway, and we laughed about it at the time. But so we think we've accomplished the most difficult part of the mission because now we're dropping into the valley with the Van Dusen, and we cruise down the river and get to the airport. And sure enough, there's an ambulance. We land. The flight surgeon, Captain Sanchez, gets out with the flight mech and the rescue swimmer, and they're assessing this lady. She's already on a stretcher, which, given the 60 side of the 65, they have to put her on our litter because the stretcher wouldn't fit. And so they put her on our litter, put her in the back of the helicopter, and Cameron and I, the other pilot, we're trying to figure out how we're going to get out of here because, we did not realize the visibility was going to be as bad up there as it was down in Humboldt. It was still, because there was no weather reporting at Dinsmore, and it was terrible. I mean, like quarter mile, we still couldn't see. Like we followed the river until we could see the runway, and then like followed the runway down to find the ambulance. But so he and I are talking, and we're like, okay, we came up with this plan, and we briefed the crew on it when they got in to make sure Rob and Ben and Captain Sanchez were good with it, and everybody rogered up on it. But our plan was, we knew that the section of river we had flown didn't have any obstacles except for a 3,000-foot mountain on the left and 3,000-foot mountain on the right. So we were going to back up the half mile we had cruised into there on and use that azimuth of the river valley just to climb out and pick up an instrument approach, essentially. So we were going to climb from, I don't remember how high Dinsmore was, but we were going to climb out of this mountain valley with 3,000-foot mountains on either side and IMC conditions up to 7,000 feet, which is what we thought we needed to get to be clear of obstacles and pick up an instrument approach. We knew at some point icing would be a problem because it was cold enough that the higher we get, eventually we're going to get into icing. So we briefed the crew. We're like, this is probably the best plan to get this lady to the hospital. If we try to crawl back down the valley we came, it's going to take a really long time. We think we can safely do this, climb into IMC conditions, pick up an instrument approach, but we're going to have to deal with icing if we get too high. So I need everybody to be looking out for icing, and everybody agrees. Sounds like a great plan. And we do that. We backtrack. We get we give ourselves some running room with no obstacles, if you will, and we end up climbing out and climbing to 7,000 feet. Looking back, this is super embarrassing, but we can all learn from each other, and so I'm just going to share this. I say it's embarrassing because even in the Army, when I was enlisted, my job was to be on the LRS team. I was a navigator. I was responsible for reading a map and compass, and I always took a lot of pride in being really good at that. And obviously, they teach you to do that as an aviator, right? And so, what I had done, and what the mistake I had made was, we picked an azimuth that was essentially an azimuth on the map that was the same as the river, and I don't remember what it was. Let's say it was 276 or something. The error I had made is in my haste and everything that was going on, I had failed to account for magnetic variation, which is, so my compass that we were relying upon was 12 degrees off in this particular area of the United States from what the map heading was. And so didn't think about it at the time. Yeah. So here I am thinking we're flying right over the river valley and we're 12 degrees off essentially because we're following the mag compass. And, rookie mistake. Here I am, not a rookie. I'm post-mobile, fairly senior aviator, going to retire pretty soon, and none of us caught it. But later, Waleka pointed out, he's like, I think we didn't take into account magnetic variation. And he and I went back one day and flew it in VMC conditions, and it wasn't anything. We weren't near anything. We got plenty of clearance. But
that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. So looking back on that, obviously it's embarrassing that I made a mistake like that, or that we as a crew. I was the one though that suggested we fly this particular azimuth. And so, I had to eat a little crow on that and share it here for all the public to hear, like something that happened a long time ago that I'm not proud of. But the fact of the matter is, if I think these podcasts are super entertaining, but we also learn things from them. And if another crew that's listening to this can hear this and not, do what I did, and it makes a difference, then I'd feel not right not sharing. So I'm really happy to share here and have a little humility, and hopefully somebody else learns from it. So yeah.
Well, I very much appreciate you sharing it. I agree with you because I like to share some of my faults as well, and hopefully that nobody else does it. And it's so hard to do. We all try to go out there and be perfect all the time. The fact of the matter is, we're not perfect all the time. It's okay to make mistakes. It's what you do to learn from them. And then hopefully we can share it on to everybody else. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to talk about one other thing. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry,
I was just going to finish. There was one last piece of that case that I was going to share. So we climbed out of that river valley and knew we were going to get the higher we got, the colder it was going to get, and we might get close to icing. And sure enough, we got to 7,000 feet, picked up an ATC clearance, and the whole crew was looking for icing. And then Rob was like, 65, first place you see it's on the hoist boom, and he's like, yeah, we're taking on ice. And I was like, well, how bad is it? And he's like, bad enough for me to say something. He was always a fun, colorful fella, and with the most sarcasm in his voice. And so I was like, all right, so we requested lower from ATC, and we were over the mountain, so they gave us a different vector, and we got lower. And anyway, the end state was we delivered her to the hospital, did an instrument approach, broke out at the airport, then flew over to the hospital and dropped her off. And as it states, she ended up having a cardiac embolism. So it worked out. It was a great case. It was an inland case, which are not super common, but it was good for the whole crew, and an interesting one because we took the flight surgeon. So yeah.
Well, congratulations. Well done to you and your entire crew. That's working. That is working right there for sure. Instruments and scans, and you're on high alert the whole time. That's tough flying right there. But if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about one other thing. And just because this is the second time you've flown in like quarter visibility or less, and that is just, I just want to emphasize to people that are out there that don't quite understand this. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, actually has restrictions for the normal people, the normal aviator out there, that you're not allowed to take off. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read it. The FAA designated standard minimums: 1 statute mile visibility for a single and twin engine aircraft, a half a mile visibility for helicopters and aircraft with more than 2 engines. Like so you and I right now, we're not legal to take off. And yet the U.S. Coast Guard, while you and I were taking off at 0.0 or quarter mile to go help those in need. It's like a wow, man, wow. I want to throw that out to you because you can't do it in a civilian aircraft. It's not legal, but yet we do it because those in need are praying for that miracle, and they're getting us. We're coming. So
yeah. I'm still flying today, flying airplanes mainly, not helicopters. But you're absolutely right. And I think the difference is the Coast Guard knows that there's a gain to be had, right? It's a balance, right? Like we wouldn't want to take off in those conditions for a training flight, right? There's Coast Guard regulation on that. But when you're talking about saving lives, what's the we used to say burning babies in the surf, which is a terrible description, but
terrible.
That's supposed to be like the ultimate, reason to go. I'm sure there's got to be. Hopefully, the crews today have something that's a little more palatable there. But when we talk about the gain, right, like the risk versus the gain, the Coast Guard, there's always, we have our own rules and regulations to keep our crews safe, but there's always the operations, the ops boss who's helping you make decisions on whether or not you should take off in a particular condition, and consider the regulations around it. But yeah, you're right. The FAA regulations are more restrictive than what the Coast Guard has. And, I have to think it's because of, in this particular case, we know we're going to have to take off in bad conditions because that's usually when folks get in trouble. And as long as it's there's a gain there for it and your crews are trained for it and can do so safely, then Coast Guard's going to continue to do that. Yeah.
And I will emphasize one thing on the back end of this, and that is, even though the Coast Guard regulations are a little lower to take off and they can go out, it's everybody to say yes and one person to say no, and you don't fly. Yep. It's that simple. Yeah. So have no illusions that we're not just hot dogging and nobody, and none of the time that I was in, that we'd be like, oh, let's just go. We can do it. No. Everybody had to have buy-in and everybody had to be on board. If somebody was like, nah, I don't feel comfortable about this, we're done. It was that simple. Yeah. So emphasize that too. So
you're absolutely right. That's what I loved about Coast Guard. It was just a total crew aspect, and everybody had buy-in and everybody had say. And you also always had, you were never alone, in the helicopter. You could also call back and get help from, other folks that they didn't have the stress on them about whether or not you needed to do a rescue and be like, need a sanity check here, get some help from the ops boss, that type of stuff. So
yeah, it's good stuff. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft as a fully integrated system or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station. The PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission.
Right on. Well, thanks, Tombo. That was an amazing story. I'm psyched for you and your entire crew. I'm gonna move on because there's one more that I want to talk about, and that is you earned yourself a Coast Guard Achievement Medal while you were there, and this was in December, same year. And I actually thought it was kind of funny because it's on the exact same aircraft as the last one. So you and this in particular helicopter had a good time together.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize it was the same year though, but yeah, that's not surprising. So yeah, good times. Was it the 5.8? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, and Humboldt Bay, you have 3 aircrafts to choose from. So the possibility is definitely there. I found it quite amusing. It was the same aircraft. So, but here's this write-up. Citation to accompany the award of the Coast Guard Achievement Medal, Gold Star in lieu of third to Lieutenant Commander Thomas D. Jones, United States Coast Guard. Lieutenant Commander Jones is cited for superior performance of duty aboard Coast Guard Helicopter 6558 on the night of December 26, 2015, while responding to a plea for help from the captain of the fishing vessel Northern Lights. A crew member had been struck in the head by a parting steel cable, and the crew was unable to stop the bleeding. While transiting to the scene, Lieutenant Commander Jones worked feverishly with Sector to coordinate the vessel to prepare their decks for hoist and ascertain the fisherman's condition. The captain advised that he was unable to lower the rigging due to his only other mate attending to the injured fisherman. Upon arriving overhead, the aircrew studied the heaving vessel, noting the rigging and cables stretching to all corners of the deck. Lieutenant Commander Jones displayed outstanding aviation acumen while hoisting with limited power in heavy seas. Lieutenant Commander Jones worked with the vessel's captain to sustain constant steerage and hold a steady course. After multiple attempts to deliver the swimmer to the vessel, the aircrew succeeded, subsequently hoisting the stricken fisherman with precision through the swaying rigging to the helicopter. Lieutenant Commander Jones's crew then delivered the patient to medical care where he underwent emergency surgery to repair his fractured skull and remove a life-threatening pocket of air in his brain. Lieutenant Commander Jones's diligence, perseverance, and devotion to duty are most heartily commended in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. Damn, Tombo! Dude.
These always sound more impressive when you read them, Jason. You read with such enthusiasm. I love it, man. It's great.
I get excited about this. Come on, Tombo.
I'm getting the internet.
Somebody put effort into writing this.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a great SAR case. The call comes in, and first of all, I want to mention that it's because it's December 26th. Folks may, the day after Christmas, folks may not be aware of how we handle it sometimes in the Coast Guard. And this is not like a standard or anything, but one of the things I remember best about Humboldt Bay, and I think it was fairly common at other duty stations, is that for holidays, so like December 25th and New Year's, the crews would kind of volunteer or determine, like, for example, if there were crew members that, that didn't have kids, that they would oftentimes volunteer for Christmas so that they could get New Year's off, right, and go party. And the opposite was for, I had young girls, and so I had Christmas off the day before, and I was going to pull duty on New Year's kind of thing. So that was kind of, I love that about Humboldt Bay. The scheduling was really good across the board and trying to accommodate and volunteer. So in this case, I had Christmas off. We had just come on duty, me and the rest of the crew. The co-pilot on this was Scott Swan, who, if I remember right, was also a part. Yeah, he was. He was a former Army guy. And then my flight mech was a fairly junior, super quiet guy named Matt Lawrence. He was an AMT-3 and really good at his job, but just not somebody that liked to be social at all. He was a fairly quiet guy. So Matt was the type guy that if you wanted his opinion, you had to ask for it. And so kept that in mind with this case. And then our rescue swimmer, his name was Adam Carr, and Adam's great. I'd had a couple of cases with him before, and he's on the other end of the spectrum. He'll speak up. He's not afraid to tell you what he's thinking, which is great. Do you know Adam?
So I've met him just in passing.
Okay.
Like I
All
dropped
right,
into the
cool.
shop. I was like, hey, nice to meet you. And that was it. So
Yeah. Adam's is really good at his craft, and so in this particular case, and actually, I think the heroes of this SAR case are the flight mech and the rescue swimmer. It was Matt Lawrence and Adam Carr were the ones that made this work. So we get this call. It's it's not terribly late at night. It's not one of those 2 a.m. wake ups that you come out of a sleep and you're like, where am I when the SAR alarm goes off? This was at like 8:30 at night. I want to say and given that it was winter, it was already well into dark, but it wasn't in the middle of the night. We get the SAR alarm goes off. They pipe on the 1MC, for the helo to be put on the line. And the call over the intercom was a fisherman was struck by a parting cable and has been scalped with severe injuries and is unconscious. And so I'm like, wow, that sounds nasty. And so we run into the ops center, and they're explaining that this fishing vessel Northern Lights, the captain had called frantic that one of the steel cables had parted, as I described there, and most importantly that his I think it was his first mate that this happened to. There were only 3 people on the vessel. It's a fairly small vessel, and that he was unconscious, and so and that they were trying to stop the bleeding. And so we launch out. We talk to the flight surgeon, because anytime you do a medevac in the Coast Guard, it oftentimes comes with advice. A flight surgeon's involved. Like they get the flight surgeon to suggest any important factors. And in this case, when we launched out, we were told it was likely that if this person's had a compromise of their skull, that they could have air in their brain, and that once we rescued the person off the boat, we were to take him to the nearest hospital, which was in this case was inland. If you remember, Mendocino, this was off Mendocino, which is south of Humboldt, and
yep,
the nearest hospital was Ukiah, which was over a mountain range. So like I want to say it was like a 5,000 foot mountain range, and the flight surgeon was telling us to stay as low as possible, because in flying back and getting this person to care, he wanted to make sure that if there was air in their brain, that it didn't expand when we climbed, right, due to lower pressure and cause brain damage. And so we had this in mind as we go out, and we get on scene, Jason, and we find the vessel. It's not hard. It's lit up like there's lights all over the vessel, and it's dark. It's so daggum dark that it's like looking into a garbage bag and it having one little pinhole. We can see the ship like offshore, like it's just pitch black, and there's just one little light out there, and we could see it 5 miles out. So by the time we get to it, and it wasn't terribly far offshore, I don't remember how far, maybe 10, 15 miles. And we get on scene, and I'm in the right seat, and we come to a hover. We're talking to the captain, and he had a serious problem going on. So not only did he have one of his crew members who was severely injured, his other crew member apparently worked for NOAA and wasn't allowed to operate the ship. I don't know all the rules around it. It was a NOAA observer, and I may be wrong on that. But the captain was essentially saying that he did not have either enough. He didn't have enough people. With one person down, he could not lower the rigging. So first of all, this ship had a big old stanchion on the middle of the deck with 4 cables coming down from it, and then all these outriggers that were out and standing up. They weren't laid down; they were standing up. Except for he did have an outrigger out with a net that he couldn't retrieve because he needed 2 people to do it. And because he couldn't retrieve that net, he couldn't stop. He needed to stay underway because he was afraid it would get fouled in his prop. And this applies later when we're thinking about figuring out how to get the rescue swimmer on the deck. But I'll talk about that in just a second. But so we're talking to the captain. He's like, I need to stay underway. We're like, no problem. That'll help us with power. But he's driving into these waves, and they were, I think it was a 12-foot sea state, which is, not like air metal worthy. But the problem was it was a fairly short period. It was pitch black dark. I'm wearing goggles and I can't see a horizon at all. And so the only thing in my view is this lit up boat down here, right? Down to my right. And I'm trying not to follow the boat. And I'm, you've heard this before. Like the problem when you're in this situation is you're trying to keep the helicopter steady. Your only reference in the world though is this thing under you that's, you know, constantly doing this. And so
This
you
constantly moving up, down,
Yep.
left, right,
Yep.
pivot. Yeah.
Yep,
And the
exactly.
higher
And
the
so-
legs, the more they move. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, exactly. And so this thing, it's pitching constantly. I'm trying just to stay with it, maintain a constant position. And I was working quite a bit. What ended up happening was we talk about it as a crew. You talk about how, you know, you just mentioned earlier about how you get buy-in from everybody. You know, is this what we want to do? Let's come up with a plan. So we're talking about what we're going to do. And he can't lower any of the rigging. So everything up there is just trying to, you know, we're looking at it and everything's swaying. And we're worried about getting, you know, the Adam somehow tied up in some of the rigging if we try to deploy him. Normally, it would be optimal if the captain, you know, could drop out of line and Adam could get in the water because there was so much rigging. We didn't want to get him injured trying to get him on the boat. But in this case, there were nets in the water. And Adam, you know, I didn't want to put him in the water. He didn't want to get in the water with nets in the water, like liable to get caught up in a net, right? And so we can't put Adam in the water. We decided we're not going to do that. We cannot find a place to put him on the boat. Like even the bow of the boat was pitch black dark and was super tight and small, and I wouldn't be able to see the boat at all if we tried to get him on the bow. And it's pitching so much that we're thinking that's a terrible idea. So Adam suggests, he's like, just put me down right along the port side of the edge of the boat. He's like, just get me close and I will grab onto it. And so, and the reason we're not putting him on the boat is because of all the, you know, wires and towers and rigging and all. And so we try that and it doesn't go well. So like we rescue check part 2, we're going to do he's going to go down on the hook, harness deployment, and a direct deployment. And we try to get him on. I remember, and I can't see what's going on under me. You know how it works. Like Matt's doing all the talking.
Oh, yeah.
Matt's telling me what's going on. He's like, and he's doing great. He was like, okay, roger that. Rescue check part 2. He's like forward and right 20, just like standard practice, the way we do it. Forward and right 15, forward right 10, easy, hold. And I can see just a portion of the boat right here. It's the only thing I can see. No horizon. It's pitching. And embarrassingly, I don't think I'm doing a great job of holding position. And Matt's trying to talk me through it. He's trying to get Adam on, and they're swinging. He tells me he's swinging. And finally, he's like, I can't get him on. And he's like, back, you know, almost caught him in rigging. Like it's getting, you know, significantly emotional. And he's like, let's abort this. And so we abort it. We back off, like not going well. We bring Adam all the way back up in the cabin, get him on ICS so we can talk to him, right? Like, what does he think? And so Adam's like, oh, that was tough. You know, got really close to that rigging one time. And Matt's like, yeah, sorry about that. And I'm like, I feel bad about it too. You know, anyway, we talk about another plan. And this time Adam says, let's try it again. I think we can do better this time. Try to get me to the same spot. Matt, when you get me over that spot, just let out the hoist. It's okay if you drop me a little bit, essentially is what he's saying.
Okay.
And I don't know. And so I'm like, okay, that sounds good. We're just going to do essentially the same thing, but you're asking the mech to deliver you a little quicker once you're over the spot, right? So you don't swing away. And
yes.
What I don't,
yes,
yeah,
good idea.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And so what I don't know is, and Adam tells me this later, that after he unplugged off ICS, he screamed in Matt's ear and he said, if you just get me close to that outrigger, I will grab it and shimmy down it, is what he says. He told me later he didn't bring it up to me because he figured I'd be like, we're not doing that. So, because I had come from Mobile, right? Like, show me where that's in the book. That's not in the book. Yeah. So,
Not in the book.
yeah, not in the book. Yeah. So, and Adam's just trying to make it happen, which is great. Like, and he did make it happen. So what ends up happening is we go in at it again, and he gets swung over the boat, and that's right. He told Matt off ICS, he's like, I want you to swing me intentionally. He's like, push on the cable and swing me onto the boat because you can't take me straight down because all the rigging. And he also didn't say that over ICS, or I'd have been like, where's that? Anyway, so that's what they did. So Matt cons me in, and I don't know it, but Matt is back there getting the pendulum going. And he literally, I found out later, swings Adam over the boat. And sure enough, he just dumps it out full right when he gets over the deck. And Adam broke his pinky finger when he landed on the deck. Cause he he tried to stop himself and caught it on the edge of the, when you're on the hook, you know better than I do, you can't control the direction you're facing. And so his back is back to the outboard port side, and he catches it on the corner and broke his finger, which I didn't know at the time. He's not going to tell us that, right? We found out later. But so anyway, the biggest challenge of that SAR case was getting Adam on the boat, and we finally did. Matt did a phenomenal job. I made it challenging for him because I couldn't see anything, and I was also embarrassed because here I was from the schoolhouse, supposed to be really good, at this, and it was challenging for me to hold position that night over that boat. And Scott Swan the whole time is talking to the captain and trying to tell me, that I'm close to over torquing each time, that I'm like working the heck out of the collective and doing a phenomenal job talking to the captain about what he needs to do. But we got Adam on. By this time, when Adam got into the cabin, the guy was conscious. So apparently he had been unconscious for about half an hour, but he was conscious at this point. Adam helped a little bit more with the bandages, ended up calling for the basket. So this time, Adam's on deck, can manage the trail line to pull the basket in from the side. And so we deliver a trail line. And then he pulls a basket in, puts the guy in the basket, comes off uneventfully, gets him in the cabin, and then same thing, sends that trail line back down, and Adam comes up in the basket. So that was much easier once we had Adam down there to manage the trail line, and the captain couldn't do that because he was steering the boat, and the other guy was trying to provide first aid. So anyway, got him off the boat, and then now we had to fly through the mountains at low altitude at night to try to keep help him with his injuries, and we did deliver him. One funny thing I remember about this, Jason, and I'll never forget the captain of this boat. When he's talking to Scott Swan on the radio, he's super nervous the whole time. You can tell he's like, he's nervous about what he's going to do about the net. He's worried about his first mate who's unconscious with a skull fracture. And he's like, tell me what to do. And he's like questioning, like, I don't understand. And Scott's trying to explain it in simple, just, that's fine. Just drive into the waves. Just keep your boat as steady as you can. And once we rescued the guy, like, we're not even finished with rescue check part 3. Like, Adam is still coming up, but the guys, the survivors in the aircraft, the captain comes on the radio on 16, and he's like, "You guys are so awesome." And I remember he's like, "The Coast Guard's the greatest thing ever. I can't, you guys, you earn your money every night. These conditions, you saved my guy. I love y'all." He's just like praising the tar out of us, and I can't even hear the mech trying to go through, clean up the cabin and telling me the door's closed. And I'm like, because this guy's screaming on the radio, and Scott's talking to him. And Scott was so funny because Scott's like this super, super chill dude. And Scott's just like, "Thank you, Captain. It was our pleasure." That's all he said. Like, and so the captain has no idea that like Tombo's up there. This was not like a standard practice. Like, this was like a challenge. But anyway, it was fun. It was fun to hear him hear praises. And later he actually had called the station and thanked us after he got his boat into Mendocino. But and then we found out later that sure enough, the guy, skull fracture, air in his brain, and that he had actually we delivered him to the Ukiah airport in an ambulance, and apparently they had really struggled with him a little bit. But the last I'd heard that he had survived, so that's good news. And but anyway, it was a great SAR case. It was made possible, like we were successful because of Matt Lawrence, the flight mech, and Adam Carr, the rescue swimmer. Yep.
Wow, what a story, man! Thank you so much for sharing that. That is incredible. Well done to you guys, the entire crew. I love these stories. I really do. It's crazy. Man, thank you for that so much. I want to touch on two things. I've had you on here for a long time, so I won't take too much more of your time, but I want to touch on something you're doing right now, because you mentioned it earlier. You're still flying. You're at Virginia Tech, working with the FAA or working as the FAA?
Yeah. So let me explain. So
okay.
When I left Humboldt, when I left Humboldt, I was looking for a typical EMS flying job, which is what a lot of us do. And I ended up essentially meeting with somebody who was doing that job and suggested I go talk to Virginia Tech because they had an FAA drone test site. So it's the FAA has 7 test sites across the nation for drones, and Virginia Tech is one of those. And I came over here and talked to these folks. I couldn't spell drone at the time. I'd never worked with drones before in my life, but what I did have was some aviation safety experience, which they saw as valuable. And so I came here and started working in aviation safety, and eventually I've been doing that since 2017, and now I'm the director here. We have about with students. We have a handful of students, so about 25 people that work for us that perform research to help the FAA in safely integrating drones in the national airspace system. So that's what I'm doing. The flying that I'm doing, there's a flying club here at Virginia Tech. It's called the Hokie Flying Club. We own 2 airplanes, a 177 with retractable gear and a 172. So I do that's just personal flying for pleasure. But yeah, so that's where I work now at the Virginia Tech FAA UAS test site.
Man, that's cool. That's cool. Any like good like information on the drones that we need to know?
Yeah,
maybe we can't talk about that. I don't even know. I mean, by asking questions here, I'm like, hey, can't talk about that.
most of the work we do is for the FAA, so it's public information. We do conduct some evaluation of counter UAS systems, so that's the only stuff we deal with that's like that's sensitive in nature, and that's around keeping drones out of places that they shouldn't be in terms of like sensitive areas. But most of our work is done on trying to figure out what technologies can be leveraged to allow drones to operate in the same airspace as other aircraft safely, because drones avoiding airplanes, avoiding helicopters, for example. And so a lot of the work we do is centered around looking at safety mitigations around that, and doing a lot of tests and evaluation and research around that. So I will say that we're starting to get into the advanced air mobility realm, because a lot of the stuff with autonomous drones is very applicable to passenger carrying future aircraft that you'll get on that won't be a pilot. But I think it's going to be a ways out here before the public has a stomach for that, right? I work in this field, and I'm not ready to get on one of those aircraft. But we'll get there one day. It's I think with bright minds, and this is super interesting. A lot of my staff are traditional pilots. Like they have, I have folks with AMP or mechanics. I have folks with AMP. I have folks with ATP. And that's important, because when you're talking to the FAA, most of the FAA folks are traditional type aviators right now too. But that's changing in the drone industry. I have a handful of folks who have studied drones. That's what they studied in college was drone. They have degrees that are drone degrees, which is wild. So there's like 14 different universities now that offer drone degrees. So the landscape's changing. The future's bright. I think we'll see a lot of benefit in the next decade or so of what drones can do that better our lives. So, yep.
I'm excited to see where it can go. I've had a lot of conversations. I shouldn't say a lot. I've had conversations outside like, oh, are drones taking over the pilots? Are they taking over? And it's one of the questions came back to me is like, well, could they take over for search and rescue? And I'm like, well, they can assist, but I can't picture the aircraft without a pilot, a flight mech, and a rescue swimmer or a rescue men to be able to go out and do that collectively, as just send a drone out and hook down and then somebody gets on it. I just with the stuff that I've experienced, I can't see it. So I think there'll always be a need for us. Yeah,
think about the rescue swimmer's role. Like, are you going to have like some type of autonomous system that goes out and swims to the boat? I don't know. Maybe there's some creative minds looking at that, but I think it's not going to happen in our lifetime. Like right now, we're still going to have, the way we've done it for years. We certainly have automation and systems that help us do it safer. And there may be some use cases. Certainly, the Coast Guard's already using drones, to perform some of its other missions, like outside of search and rescue. But there may be some cases in the future where some life-saving or just think of delivering life jackets, or think of delivering AEDs to ships, or, when you're delivering equipment, sometimes it can be a little easier to do it autonomously with an autonomous aircraft. But I think we're a long way from our traditional crews being replaced, just because, not how often do we launch out on cases, Jason, and what we arrive to deal with is totally different than what we were told, right? And so tell me how that's
all the time.
And so you definitely need a human there that's in the loop, that's having to adjust to changing conditions. So I think it's going to be a while
from the report to the actual.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Hey, Tombo, I appreciate this. I got one last question I'd like to ask all my guests, and that is advice that you would pass on to everybody. You've done Army, Coast Guard. You went from a Blackhawk to a 65. That's a big deal for people that don't understand. That's a big deal. and now you're working with the FAA and drones. What advice would you pass on to everybody?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. I think what I would pass on is I would encourage folks that to not shoulder the emotional burden of the cases that didn't go well, to learn how to set that down, right? Like there's a lot of incredible cases that you cover on your podcast, and most of them are positive, right? And they turn out to be how the rescues went well. I think for the folks in the industry, certainly most of us have cases that probably didn't end the way we would like to, right? And those are the ones that we tend to sometimes carry with us, and it can be a little bit challenging. First off, I would encourage folks to use Coast Guard's resources. There's some incredible resources out there to help folks kind of process when things don't go well. So I would encourage folks to certainly use those resources. The words that I would pass along is to suggest to folks that the Coast Guard gives us some incredible tools. We get trained really well, but sometimes we get launched out on cases where the particular standard way of doing things doesn't work. Sometimes we have to get creative to figure out how to make it happen. And whether we're doing it the standard way or the creative way, sometimes the end result doesn't turn out like we would like, and that can be super challenging for certainly for some of the crew members. And I would like to remind folks that when you're thinking about those situations, we all want to do really well. We're in this business because we want to help people, and so the challenge becomes looking at and recognizing that we didn't put these people in the situation that we're in. We're trying to help them, right? Certainly, but when these professionals go out, professional fishermen, fisher persons go out fishing, and these recreational boaters go out, or these hikers go out, they know that there's some risk they're taking on, and sometimes they make choices that put themselves in a particular situation, and where their only opportunity to come out alive. And that's a heavy burden for us to carry. And I would just remind folks that we didn't put those folks in that position, and we use the tools we have, and we have to just rest at night knowing that we did the best we could. And those skills that we have, while it may not have worked on this case, certainly proved beneficial in some other cases. And I would just encourage folks to rest easy with that and set that emotional burden down.
That's good advice right there. I appreciate it for sure. Tombo, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate this, the stories, the knowledge, the laughs. I've enjoyed our entire conversation. I've absolutely loved this. I look forward to the day I get down to Virginia area and you and I can meet up and have a beer together, or a couple. Just saying.
Well, I'm buying. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks again, Jason.
Anytime. And I'm definitely on my way now that I know you're buying. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Sounds great, man. Sounds great.
Awesome. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here.
Go.
Now it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share, or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at the Real ResQ. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real ResQ podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
Axnis. The Axnis PNG wireless ICS system delivers cutting-edge wireless ICS technology to any aircraft as a fully integrated system or as a carry-on, carry-off mobile base station. The PNG wireless system is the right solution for any mission.
And
Breeze Eastern. For over 80 years, Breeze Eastern has designed and manufactured battle-proven aerial rescue hoists, winches, and cargo hooks. Each product is carefully crafted to support demanding mission scenarios, ensuring the job gets done safely and efficiently. Visit them today at www.breeze-eastern.com.
Go.
set. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Go. Come on. Come on. Oh, geez, they're kicking my ass right now. Oh, but I got it. Come on, dogs. Come on. Come on. Oh, 100-meter sprint. Get some. Oh, yeah, you go cool. That was great. What'd you think, Rhoda? How did we do? Yeah, I think we did pretty good too. Beach sprints. Let's go. And they're ready to go again. I love it.